Hello and welcome to another episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. I'm Mike Evans.
And I'm David Price.
David, in this episode we are going to be talking about the
Technics SU-G700 integrated amplifier.
And can I just tell you, as soon as you say the word Technics, I just sort of reel a little bit, and I know it's unfair in these days, but a bit of a gut reaction from when I was in the retail part of hi-fi.
Yeah.
And if people used to come in and say, you know, got any Technics, then you'd say, no, sorry, we sell hi-fi here, which is probably quite cruel, really, looking back. But we felt like that because I think we were, dare I say, sort of hi-fi snobs. We probably still are.
Well, you were, Mike.
There's no two ways about it. I was a massive hi-fi snob.
I was too, as well, I think.
And I wouldn't have entertained having a Technics product in any of my systems. So it's interesting now to sort of fast forward, you know, however many years it is, 20, 30 years or whatever.
Over 30 years.
And find ourselves reviewing a Technics amplifier.
Yeah.
But I think with just cause, I think we've actually found a really good amplifier worth reviewing here. And it's not sort of Technics' first proper hi-fi, is it? Because we have the lovely, 1200 turntables, which are absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Solid as solid can be.
Careful, Mike, you'll upset the
I
internet.
know.
I
I do have to be careful with that. You're praising two Technics products in one review. Gosh.
Yeah, steady on.
But this is a pretty decent amplifier, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a very serious attempt by Technics to establish themselves kind of back in the two-channel specialist hi-fi field. So they've just launched the SUR1000, which is their flagship integrated, which I don't know the exact pricing at this moment, but it's going to be many thousands.
It's proper money, isn't it?
Proper money.
Yeah.
This one that we're reviewing today is £2,200. So it kind of fits into the exposure 3510 kind of territory.
It does. So it's stiff competition it's up against, let's be fair here. But Technics always was, and that was the problem in the past. The competition was always better, wasn't it, in the past, particularly with amplifiers.
Yeah, and I think, going back to the 80s, then in the UK especially, we tended to get the sort of very mainstream mass market Technics stuff, didn't we? Technics were always doing some very nice high-end stuff, but it often didn't get out of Japan. Maybe in Europe you could get it in Germany, and you could also get it in the United States, but rather like Sony, they didn't normally import the very top stuff. So I think for people like us, when we were kind of our formative years were the 80s really, as far as hi-fi is concerned. We kind of associate the brand with sort of very mainstream mass market, sort of fairly stuff laced with power meters and buttons and knobs and flashing lights and that kind of thing.
And stack systems.
Exactly. Yeah. So this new generation is not that. Technics are trying to kind of re-establish themselves as a kind of premium manufacturer in the industry. There are far fewer large Japanese manufacturers doing two-channel specialist hi-fi now than there were 25, 30 years ago. So I was thinking about this earlier. So the brands that used to make hi-fi that don't anymore, then it's Aiwa, Akai, Hitachi, Mitsubishi even did it. Sony had a very big presence, and I'm sure you'll think of many more. They've all kind of left the playing field. They're being sort of subbed, and we've only got now, I think, Yamaha, Marantz, Denon, and maybe Pioneer that I can think of. Obviously, plus Technics as Japanese manufacturers doing mainstream hi-fi.
Sure. Sure. It's interesting what they're trying to achieve with this amp as well. It's a slightly different design than you would probably expect from a British amp in many ways. Although, please don't get me wrong, it's a really well built bit of kit. The insides are incredibly neatly laid out. Everything's really well shielded. Yeah. All of those really important design principles have all been included. It's a proper heavyweight performer. Yeah. I mean, this amp has got buckets of power.
Yeah.
It's going to struggle to find speakers you can't drive.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. We'll get to the sound quality in a minute, but the interesting thing for me was that I spoke to Technics Chief Technical Officer Tetsuya Itani, and I've talked to him quite a lot over the past 5 years, because he was the guy who basically brought back the SL-1200, and that was a really big deal, because the old SL-1200 Mark II and whatever, they'd run out the machines that they used to make those had worn out, so they had to justify a massive investment to start retooling for the new generation of SL-1200s, and Itani was part of that team that made the kind of case to the management, to the senior management.
You'd love to have been a fly on the wall in that meeting, wouldn't
absolutely,
you? We're going to retool for turntables, guys. They must have wondered which time warp they've gone through.
Exactly, it was about 2012, and it was like the sort of just before the vinyl revival really started. But they had a massive letter writing campaign. Loads of people have been writing from all around the world saying, "Please bring back the 1200." But after they did the turntables in kind of 2012, 13, 14, 15 and got rolled out all of those, they're now pushing out the amplifiers. That's their next kind of wave of Technics stuff. So it's a big deal to try these amps and to hear them. And they've not just simply put an old style Class AB amplifier in a box with a frame type transformer and a couple of power meters and some kind of loudness control. That's not what they've done. They've done a very thorough engineering job, and like many are moving towards digital. And the SU-G700 is Itani calls this a full digital amp. It's not Class D. It's basically Class D plus a kind of DSP front end.
Sure.
I won't get into too much of the sort of detail, because you might, might bore you off your bar stool. But there's plenty of info on the internet if you care to look, including Technics' website, about that.
There's lots of acronyms involved in this, aren't there?
There are an awful lot of acronyms.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Japanese hi-fi is an acronym-friendly.
It really
space,
is.
Isn't it?
Yes,
So,
100%. This is no exception at all, is it?
As far as I know, I don't think they've written any acronyms on the front
No.
fascia, which is.
Actually, I have to say, the front fascia looks super smart. It looks like a really purposeful amplifier. VU meters. Very minimalist, obviously no tone controls, anything like that. Just really, really nice, elegant layout, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's got a volume control, a source selector, and 2 big power meters.
Massive power meters,
which is all you need.
What's
really.
not to like?
Exactly.
I mean, really, absolutely.
So I think the industrial design, the look of it is very nice, very clean, and. It actually does a lot of stuff that you have to kind of go through sub-menus on the remote control to get to. It's got a moving magnet and moving coil phono stage you can flip between, and all sorts of other little bits and pieces. But
can I just mention the phono stage? Because we're both really impressed by it. It's a super quiet, very well engineered phono stage, isn't it? It's not just something, and you said this earlier, I'm stealing your line, which has sort of been a pinch from Tandy or Radio Shack, and just sort of bolted on as a here you've got a phono stage. It's been properly designed and thought of, hasn't it?
Yeah. So I spoke to Mr. Itani about a month ago, I think it was, and he was sort of secretly very proud of it, actually. So the SUR-1000 has got a very fancy DSP based phono stage which does all kinds of very clever things, but Mr. Itani was almost sort of super specially proud of what they've done with the SU-G700, which is a standard analog phono stage, all discrete transistor. It's being done really well. And then, because it's the design is a digital amplifier, it has to go into the digital domain. So they use a Burr-Brown ADC, not a DAC, an analog to digital converter to turn it into a digital data audio stream. But it is a really, really nice phono stage, we think, and we were amazed how quiet it was as well.
So good.
Yeah.
So, really, really excellent. I mean, to the point where you don't need to go out and buy an external one, between your turntable, because this is so good.
Yeah.
And actually, I would say for a lot of amps around the £2,000 mark, that actually may be something you do need to do.
Yeah.
And there's plenty to choose from, but I think you can negate that here completely.
Exactly. If you buy this amp, you don't need to add another phono stage.
No.
Because the one that it comes with is very good already.
Yeah.
And you were sort of saying, and it was a sort of, I think it was meant as a compliment. It almost sounds like CD because we were playing my Marantz TT1000 turntable. We were playing various records with it, and it's just so quiet.
It really is.
There's no hum.
No.
There's no hiss.
No. Even really cranking it up.
We were really cranking it up.
Yeah, which you can because it's got that much power.
Yeah.
I mean, my gosh, it's endless power coming out of this thing.
Well, I think that's a great point. So I think it's listed as 2 times 140 watts per channel.
Into 8 times.
RMS into 8, yeah. And I think twice into 4. But I don't actually care about the rated power because it just
doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop.
It's like a kind of nuclear power station in hi-fi terms, with vast amounts of power coming from something quite small.
It's funny, going back to what we started talking about and being in retail. The second most popular question after "Have you got any Technics?" was how many watts is that, mate?
Yeah.
And this is like 1 billion because it just, as you said, it doesn't matter. You're not interested. It's just as long as you've got enough to drive the speakers, and this has got in abundance.
Yeah, I think enough is a great way of describing it. It's kind of like Rolls-Royce used to say in the old days when people used to ask them the power output of their 6.7 litre V8.
Yes,
it's got sufficient power, sir.
Absolutely.
And I think that's probably a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
So we were using my Yamaha NS1000s, and these they're pretty efficient. They're 91 dB, but they are hard to drive as a load. They really make amplifiers suffer, and a bit like your ice barracks actually.
Yes, yeah.
But it was almost like they weren't there. The amp just didn't notice them. It was just sort of throwing them around like a rag doll. It didn't care at all. And there's not many amplifiers at that price that do that.
I can't think of any others, to be honest.
Even the Explosion 3510, which has got a lot of power, didn't quite have the same total ease and nonchalance.
No.
And we were playing, and because of that wonderful load driving and power ability, we were going for really thumping music, weren't we?
Big tracks. Some really big tracks.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us onto the sound quality.
Yeah.
How would you describe it? How would you sum it up?
Interesting.
Yeah. That's why I asked you.
So the most identifiable aspect of its sound is that power and dynamics. So there is no way of getting around the fact that it has effortless, vast amounts of power. So we were playing Kraftwerk's The Robots, I think, and Space Lab, and stuff like that. And that's got really kind of punching, driving sort of synth bass, hasn't it?
It has.
And the Technics just like
really tight, really controlled. Very, very
just
good.
Thundering power with no sense of struggling or anything like that. It's just easy peasy lemon squeezy, wasn't it?
But again, it made it sound like a CD. And I think this is the pattern which runs through the whole of the Technics production, if you like. Is it just it can make the most. I mean, how old is that recording? That's early 70s, isn't it? And it's proper.
Yeah, so it's actually I think it's late 70s.
Late 70s, the model was on it, wasn't it? Yeah,
exactly, yeah.
So absolutely. So very late 70s, but it would have been. I mean, there's tape hiss on it, and there's it's a very analog sound, a very analog recording rather, but it was producing a really digital sound, and you can only put that down to all the DSP, all the digital signal processing within the Technics, which makes that happen. And for me, it lost a bit in the when you listen to that track on the exposure, all of that, there's no such word, but analogness comes back, and it's all lost in the tech. It sort of digitizes everything, doesn't it? I would
say it's all lost, but I know exactly what you mean. There's it has a more mechanical quality to it, doesn't it?
It does,
and it doesn't have the kind of wonderful kind of lucidity of the exposure in the mid-band.
No.
And the also the MVA that we listen to as well at the same time, the S80 power amp.
And we talk about musicality, and it's a bit of a vague term, but as soon as you put the NVA on, it was all the music came back into it. And,
I mean, but then again, all of the bass went out of it.
Because it's just, I mean,
there's
so much power, there really is. There's a market for this amp, I think, is where we're going here.
Exactly.
I think going back to the beginning of this riff, if you were that hi-fi shop, somebody came in and they were looking for the Technics, you'd probably still try and sell them the NVA or the exposure for all the same reasons, more musical, lovely British hi-fi, etc., etc. But there's a market for this amp.
Without a doubt.
Somebody who loves all that headroom, all that power, likes that sort of very clinical digital sound, likes the way it's presented. I mean, it's a great looking amp, it really is. It's pretty, so it's going to last you forever.
I mean, I think I think we have to be honest that no amp is perfect, and we were doing the Musical Fidelity A1, which is a perfect example of an imperfect amp. It's sublimely good in the mid-band and just magically musical, but it has all kinds of other issues. And the Technics is almost the other side. It's like the kind of matter and antimatter kind of thing. It's the opposite of it. So the Technics has wonderful current drive and power drive, effortless dynamics and all the rest of it, but it doesn't have that sweet musical mid-band.
No.
And the treble as well, to me, lacks the sort of subtlety and finesse. One good thing is it's never harsh. It's not a harsh sounding amp. There's no kind of clangy class A-B sort of chromium plated upper mid that you get on some amps.
And a big soundstage from it.
Very, very big.
Huge soundstage. Really impressive. And we tried it with the neat neat magistras as well, the isobaric, and they sounded really great with it as well. Really opened up. And a really beguiling sound from a fairly small box. And it drove them no problem. Of course it did. So.
Well, I mean, I've been using it in my own system now for the best part of a month, and normally I don't want to incriminate myself here, but when I review stuff that doesn't particularly do it for me, it tends to get put back in the box and the courier come to collect it.
Sure.
But I kept using this because I was quite intrigued by it. It's so capable in some ways, and it's decent in others. It's not bad. I came to like it on balance. But again, it's a kind of ideally you'd have both. You'd have two amps for different occasions. So I think for me. The speaker amp matching thing is a big part. If you have hard to drive speakers, and you want thump and power, it's a really big plus point for that amp and a great reason why you would buy it. Whereas if you have slightly easier to drive speakers, you go for the MVAs of this world or whatever, wouldn't you? So,
and I think also, if we could hear ourselves in 1992 saying 30 years on we're going to be saying this, I haven't put it back in the box yet. We'd been shocked, I think, wouldn't we? And it's a real testimony to how much we like this amp. I'm going to ask you the question. Sorry about this. Riffometer score out of 10. What are you going to give the Technics?
I think I'm going to give it 8.
Okay.
So it does what it does well, brilliantly, but it doesn't have that sort of sweet, sort of romantic, lucid musical quality that you and I particularly like, I think.
Sure.
But it's a grower, actually.
And I've got to be honest, you've spent more time with it than I have, but I've been beguiled by the phono stage, impressed by the power, delighted by the looks. But that aside, if this is a hi-fi riff, then I'm only going to give it 7.5. Because I think there are better sounding, more hi-fi, quote unquote, power amplifiers out there, indeed pre-powers for a similar price.
Okay.
But still, I mean, that's 5 more than I would have done in 1992.
Well, I was going to say, Mike, you wouldn't even have had it in the house, would you?
Things are evolving, aren't they? The world is changing. And on that note, can we just say a huge thank you once again for watching this episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.